And even that, we don't even know that that's meaningful. It might just be an illusion. Now, you might think that's silly, but there's millions, perhaps billions of people in other world religions that actually believe that this reality is a dream or an illusion. There's many New Agers who believe that. And I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying there's nothing that necessarily tells us by having an experience that it was a meaningful experience of the external world. Those things are assumed. Now, I agree that there is an external world. I agree that we assume those things. But where I disagree is the means by which we justify or give an account for or explain our worldviews. See, I think, and I believe, and I can show, I think, that worldviews operate as a whole. It's a web of beliefs, a network of beliefs that we have. It's a thing that we read the world through like glasses. Our worldview is like our glasses, like in They Live, right? When Rowdy Piper puts on the glasses and they see the world the way it truly is. Likewise, our worldviews work that same way. And these philosophical principles are kind of the architecture or the words that we use to describe the logic or the operating system that we have operating not just in our mind, but the operating system of the world itself that we're tapping into and learning about. Now, again, you could be skeptical and say, well, but we don't know any of that. How can we prove any of that? Well, one way to prove it is to do it indirectly through what's called an indirect argument, an argument from the impossibility of the contrary. To say, all right, well, if we deny the principle of causation, how can we link any meaningful event to any other meaningful event? In fact, we're going to get to meaning in just a second. There's also something that ultimately has meaning in that kind of a worldview. And let's take a look at another principle here that I think also ties into this, and that's the principle of teleology. This means purpose, and do things have an actual intentionality and a purpose, both in their beginning and in their end? Maybe there are no intentionalities or purposes in the world other than arbitrary human purposes. But humans are finite. Humans come and go. How do we know that those finite meanings actually have any universal, eternal meaning? When you think about something like the word truth, right? When you say, well, this is true. Well, is it true in the past? It seems like it would be, right? It's true that Caesar crossed the Rubicon, right? At least we think so. But is it still true today? Will it still be true forever? And this is an interesting argument that Leibniz makes about the eternality of truth. There's an interesting notion here, an idea that truth seems to suggest eternality, something beyond the mere temporal. If we think about things like mathematical principles, laws of logic, right? The law of identity, etc. Those things seem to suggest a kind of fundamental necessity for language, for meaning, for conveying meaning. So this means that these principles, even though they're not immediately findable under a microscope or testable in a lab, like causation or like teleology, it means these principles have to kind of be the case, or else we're in a position where there's no knowledge, no science, no logic, no math, no nothing. In other words, we're not saying that you can't do those things, right? There's plenty of mathematicians who probably doubt these things. The point is that you can't give an account for or ground or give a justification for those principles that you're using because you're also believing in a worldview that denies and rejects those things. So that's kind of what I'm getting at with using some of these older argumentation, like the teleological argument or the cosmological argument. I'm saying that there's more than this, because we can actually say these principles are real and they point to God, but they point to God in a different way than the way that you might suspect. And what do I mean by that? Well, all of these principles utilize or are connected to the notion of logos, or the notion of reason, discourse, or explanation. In the history of philosophy, sometimes logos in ancient Greek philosophy was connected to the notion of law or logi, or the meaning of a thing. And if you think about it, all of these principles, whether it's causation or teleology or ethics or whatever, if they do exist, then they have meaning. If they're meaningful, then they in some way relate to reason and to logic. Think about the principle of reasoning itself. Or think about the principle of the human faculty of reasoning, the faculty that we have to be able to reasonably conclude this or that. If reason isn't a thing, then reason and rationality are impossible. But the problem is that reason isn't a thing that you can find under a microscope. Reason isn't reducible to chaotic, ever-changing atoms and molecules. Just like the idea of the eternality of truth, if you reduce truth to matter and physicality, well, it seems like once the physical atoms of Caesar crossing the Rubicon, since they're no longer around anymore, the event has come and gone. It seems like the truth is also come and gone. So now truth, meaning, etc., all of these things in a physicalist, materialist worldview, that means reducing everything just to matter, would then ultimately make the entire world, the entire universe, and thus by extension your life and your entire expressions that you speak, also meaningless, irrational, and incoherent. They might appear to you to be meaningful and coherent, but in the other aspects of your worldview where you're a materialist, you're actually negating the possibility of meaningful sentences. And so that's why I was saying that things like meaning and words and concepts also kind of end up getting denied or destroyed in a worldview where you don't have these metaphysical principles.